Merry Christmas, friends! I am here in Wickford Castle wearing my ugliest, with an H, Christmas sweater for a special festive video. One of my favorite things to do on this channel is to read the Nancy Drew books, particularly the Nancy Drew Files series. The Nancy Drew Files for me just represent the weirdest and most wonderful aspects of the Nancy Drew franchise, not to mention the horniest. So I thought the perfect idea for a Christmas special would be to read this book, Counterfeit Christmas. No, you haven't suddenly been transported to an alternate universe. There was never a Nancy Drew game based on this book. What I'm gonna do instead of comparing it to a Nancy Drew game is to envision it as a Nancy Drew game. I've done a few book versus game videos now, including one you haven't seen yet, and I like to perhaps arrogantly think that I have a decent idea of the process of adapting a Nancy Drew book into a game. So I'm going to attempt it myself. Just to temper your expectations, this will probably be just as loose as my regular book versus game videos. The main idea is just to give you an entertaining overview of the plot. You might be looking at this cover and thinking, oh my gosh, is that Ned? And you would be wrong. Ned isn't even in this book. It is actually Stuart Teal, one of the suspects, and a smooth operator with charm to spare as he's described in the inside cover. You might also be thinking, as I am, oh my god, they made Nancy fucking blonde again. That's literally just Barbie. This isn't like my Nancy Drew book versus game videos where you just automatically know the plot of the book because you're familiar with the games. So let's read the synopsis together. Bess has gotten a real surprise for Christmas, 2 crisp new 20s that turn out to be fake. Her aunt, who works at River Heights magazine, unwittingly passed them along, and Nancy's out to trace the funny money to its source. But there's one very big distraction. Suspect Stuart Teal. He has looks to die for, and clearly has designs on Nancy. Stuart may want to corner the market on Nancy's affections, but she can't afford to take the chance, especially when another top suspect is found dead. Drawn into a world where greed rules and life isn't worth a plug nickel, Nancy has no choice but to keep her eye on the bottom line. She's searching for a counterfeiter who fits the bill of a murderer. Someone had too much fun writing that synopsis. The phrase, life isn't worth a plug nickel, feels a little insensitive. Someone died! Next, let's see if this book passes the catchy tagline test. When crime cashes in, Nancy finds that the money may be fake, but the danger is all too real. They just didn't know when to stop. That's 2 taglines in one. I love it though. Maybe all a tagline needs to impress me is a pun. Let's check this book out, shall we? Hire me, Simon & Schuster. Dear Bess, this holiday season hasn't started out very merry or bright. Dad's friend, Celeste Goodman, was caught with counterfeit bills while Christmas shopping, and she's asked me to clear her name and track down the source of the funny money. The book starts in that most festive of locations, the mall. Nancy's trying to find a Christmas present for Ned. How about a new computer thing, or a stereo, or a VCR, or a cordless phone, Bess suggested excitedly. This book was written in 1994, by the way. The 3 girls go to the hip-hop shop, which is, a jewelry store? Bess decides to buy some earrings. She pays with the 2 $20 bills her aunt gave her. Instead of placing the bills in the register drawer, the cashier scrutinized Bess before speaking. You're going to have to see the manager, he said, the corners of his mouth turning down. Wait. I can't do that. How did he do that? Okay, I give up. Imagine checking to see if a $20 bill is counterfeit. Yeah, working in retail is boring, but get a life, dude. The cashier navigated the girls through the store to a tiny office in the back. Behind a door marked manager was a large, bearded man. The manager opened his fist to reveal Bess's money. "You may have thought we'd mistake this for cold, hard cash," he spat out. "But you were wrong. I know funny money when I see it, and these 20s are obviously counterfeit." A police officer comes and takes Bess away in his squad car like a criminal. Fortunately, Chief McGinnis arrives and lets Bess off the hook. The privilege of being buddies with a cop. The chief tells Nancy that the fake bills were printed on a, quote, very sophisticated copy machine, unquote. How did the man in the store instantly know Bess's money was fake? What is wrong with him? Chief McGinnis says he's contacted the Secret Service over 2 phony $20 bills. Yeah, I'm sure they've got nothing better to do than to look into this. That evening, Bess travels to visit one of her ex-boyfriends for Christmas, leaving Nancy and George behind in River Heights. The game would probably have both George and Bess out of town for the holidays, just to cut down on the number of characters and easily explain their absence. There are usually around 4 to 5 in-person characters in a Nancy Drew game, and Bess and George are rarely in that number. The focus is on the suspects. Also, I should mention I'm imagining this as an early Nancy Drew game around the Message in a Haunted Mansion era, just because that's the era where my Nancy Drew book-to-game knowledge comes from, and the era where Her Interactive actually made games based on the Nancy Drew Files series. If I had to compare the game I'm imagining to any other game in the series, I'd probably say it's most like Stay Tuned for Danger. Chief McGinnis requests that Nancy look into the counterfeiting problem herself. The real reason Chief McGinnis loves Nancy so much? She's free labor. Nancy and George's first step is to go visit Celeste Goodman, Bess's aunt, who works as an advertising director for River Heights magazine. I think all the action up to this point will take place off-screen, by the way, probably in Nancy's opening letter. A thing about the Nancy Drew games is that they don't do a whole lot of location switches, so I'm picturing most of the action taking place in the magazine offices. Also in my interpretation, where I'm role-playing as Her Interactive, don't want to dig too deep into that, Celeste would be the one caught with the counterfeiting money, as you probably gathered from my opening letter. She would then reach out to Nancy for help, and the events of the game would start with Nancy questioning Celeste. Also, since I'm envisioning both Bess and George being out of town, it makes more sense for Celeste to be a Drew family friend rather than Bess's aunt. Celeste is visibly tense and edgy as she talks to Nancy about the counterfeit money. Nancy made a mental note of how flustered Celeste was acting. Everyone's a suspect, even Bess's beloved aunt. But we already know she's innocent because her last name is Goodman. Is someone looking for a counterfeiter? A male voice boomed. Well, look no further. I can tell you who it is. No, actually, he can't, because he's that type of guy who thinks it's funny to joke about a crime. His name is Jason Green, and he's the magazine's business writer. Jason certainly was good looking, Nancy noted, trying to stay objective. He was in his late 20s, she judged, and well over 6 feet tall, maybe 6'3". With straight, dirty blonde hair and clear blue eyes, he resembled a California surfer in a business suit. Very objective. We find out that Celeste received the cash from 2 of the magazine's other employees. The art director, Pamela Carrera, and a cartoonist, Chloe Lee. Oh my gosh, it's me! I'm a suspect! I think you should know, Jason said, a touch self-consciously, that Chloe is my girlfriend. We've been going out for 6 months now. Okay, never mind. I would never go out with a man who doesn't take crime seriously. In the book, Chloe has her own studio, which Jason drives Nancy and George to, but I think in the game, her studio would just be part of the magazine offices, just for simplicity's sake. Chloe is a petite woman with straight black hair that reaches her shoulders. That sounds almost exactly like me with my old hair. How to accuse someone of identity theft. Chloe shares her studio with a graphic designer named Marco Diani. Chloe organizes plans for everyone to go out for dinner. Jason has also invited his friend Stuart Teal, whose family owns a printing press. Stuart was shorter than Jason by at least 2 inches. Stuart littler, you could say, but still more than 6 feet tall. His brown eyes matched his straight chestnut hair. Stuart appeared to be in his late 20s and equally as successful as Jason. His navy blue double-breasted suit fit beautifully, Nancy noticed, and he had all the right touches. Leather-trimmed suspenders, gold cufflinks and matching tie clip, plus shiny black wing-tipped shoes. A matching tie clip and cufflinks? What could be sexier? Stuart says, "Why not come by the plant tomorrow, say first thing, 9 a.m. I'd be happy to show you the ropes." Nancy's heart skipped a beat despite her effort to remain cool. There was no mistaking the signal that Stuart was intrigued by Nancy, and that he was available. Is there really no mistaking it? He's inviting her to tour his family's printing business at 9 in the morning. That's not exactly the most romantic date. Nancy and George return to the magazine office to meet with Pamela, the art director. Pamela has waist-length red hair and she's wearing a finely cut, rust-colored suit with lavishly embroidered lapels. I think I'm in love. You may be thinking, that's a lot of characters that have been introduced so far. Definitely a trend I've noticed while reading the books the Nancy Drew games are based on is that a lot of the book characters are either removed or combined in the adaptation process. Again, this is based on the assumption that there'll be around 4 to 5 suspects in any given Nancy Drew game, excluding Ransom of the Seven Ships, but we don't talk about that game. First, I think that Jason and Stuart could be one character. Jason's role is really weak and boring, and everything he does, Stuart could do. Their personalities are not very distinct from one another, and they even look similar in terms of appearance, both being sharply dressed young professionals. Jason's job as a business writer has no real bearing on the story, while Stuart's family's printing company is a huge part of what makes him a viable suspect. Stuart could even be Chloe's boyfriend. Although romance is a big element of the Nancy Drew Files books, it's never been an important part of the games. If you combine Jason and Stuart, the only thing you're really losing is the Nancy and Stuart romantic subplot, which I don't think is a very great loss. I also think Celeste and Pamela could be combined. Spoiler, but Pamela just exists as a sort of red herring. The only thing she does in the book is act suspiciously. She doesn't contribute anything meaningful, other than her sexy hair and custom-tailored suit. In fact, I don't think I'll end up mentioning her again in this video, that's how insignificant she is. Similarly, Celeste is just there to disperse suspicion, and she's not even very good at that. I never took her seriously as a suspect. If you combine Pamela's distinctive look and Celeste's role as a sort of trigger for this whole case, you have the best of both worlds. So that leaves us with 4 suspects: Marco, Chloe, Celeste, and Stuart. Remember when Stuart came on to Nancy and romantically invited her over to his printing plant? Well, Nancy's brought George with her. I think the printing plant would be a secondary location in the game. A lot of action happens there, so it feels justified. And think of all the potential printing puzzles. Her interactive would be salivating just at the thought. Nancy is curious about the counterfeiting process and asks Stuart about it. We make plenty of money here, but we do it the old-fashioned way, by earning it. As promised, Stuart gives Nancy and George a tour of the plant. Nancy watches the process. If posters could be produced this fast, imagine how much money could be printed in an hour, Nancy reasoned. They put reasoned so you wouldn't think Nancy's pondering doing a bit of counterfeiting herself. During the tour, a secretary comes up to tell Stuart he has a phone call. Long distance. It's the Geiss Bueller Company from Switzerland. Stuart says, "I'll call them back in an hour." The Swiss are well known for their printing skills, Nancy thought. What business could Stuart's firm have with them? Are the Swiss known for that? I've heard of Swiss chocolate, Swiss cheese, Swiss watches. I've never heard that the Swiss are famous for their printing skills. The tour ends at a delivery platform outside the building. A truck pulls up. The doors at the back of the truck were flung open, and Nancy saw that there was a masked person inside. A masked person hurling a huge carton straight at her. Standing at the very edge of the loading dock, Nancy had nowhere to go but down to avoid the flying carton. She landed on the asphalt, 7 feet down on her feet, but the impact caused her to tumble backward. Automatically, she thrust her arms behind her, breaking her fall with her hands. George and Stuart had rolled out of the path of the hurtling box. "Are you sure you're not hurt?" Stuart asked, kneeling next to Nancy to examine her. The printing executive extended his hand to help Nancy up off the ground. Grasping his fingers, she winced and was stopped cold by a shooting pain in her wrist. "Actually," she said, downplaying her injury, "my wrist is a little sore right there. I must have strained it a bit." The feminine urge to downplay your injury around a big, strong man. Stuart circled her waist with his arm and whisked her to her feet in a single strong motion. When Stuart's arm lingered around her waist for a few seconds longer than necessary, Nancy was pleased at the reassuring touch and disappointed when the moment ended. She had to remind herself she was on a case. She doesn't remind herself that she's dating Ned, though, or that she still hasn't bought him a Christmas present. The tour is another element which I think would be cut from the game. Instead, I see Nancy chatting with Stuart in his office and then exploring the printing plant on her own, picking up items and solving little puzzles. Probably at least one of which would be a tile puzzle. The next day, Stuart invites Nancy and George to play squash with him and Jason. Nancy caught herself debating about what makeup to bring. She didn't want Stuart to see her a mess. "Why am I so worried about what Stuart thinks?" she asked herself, "especially when I have Ned." But she knew the answer. She was beginning to like Stuart. In every single Nancy Drew Files book I've read so far, Nancy questions her fidelity to Ned, which I think says a lot. After their game of squash, Nancy and George go relax in the steam room. But when they get up to leave, the door handle won't turn. "That's strange," Nancy said. "These things never lock." As steam continued to fill the room, the temperature escalated. Nancy felt as though she were on fire. George had no better luck. They were obviously locked in. Their need to escape was urgent. The steam room was getting hotter by the second. I don't need to imagine what this event would look like in a Nancy Drew game. We've already seen this exact same situation in White Wolf of Icicle Creek. Obviously, Nancy has to do a timed pipe puzzle to escape, or Stuart just opens the door. That works too. I don't think the whole scene at the squash court would be in the game. The only thing of significance that happens there is that Nancy's life is endangered, and that can and does happen literally anywhere. Nancy and George go visit Chloe and Marco's old college professor, a conversation which I think would take place over the phone in the game, and learn that Marco was expelled because, wait for it, he was using a desktop printer to counterfeit money. They also learned that Marco and Chloe used to date. That night, there's a cartoonist's award dinner. Nancy wears a dress that shows off her shapely legs. That's a direct quote, by the way. And George wears pants, of course, because she's a lesbian. During the dinner, Marco and Jason fight, and Nancy gets Stuart alone to question him about it. Stuart touched Nancy's face lightly as he talked. Marco was deeply in love with Chloe, and she's with Jason now. He never got over her, and now he wants them to be as miserable as he is. I wouldn't be surprised if you found love, not money, at the bottom of this crime. Are you saying you think Marco is the counterfeiter, and that he's trying to frame Chloe to get revenge? Nancy asked. Stuart stopped stroking Nancy's face. They're having this serious conversation, and Stuart's just doing this to Nancy's face. Stuart gently placed his hands on Nancy's shoulders. "I'm not positive," Stuart told her earnestly, "but I can tell you one thing for sure." Gliding his hands down Nancy's arms, he said, "People will do almost anything for love. After meeting you, I can speak as an expert on that subject. And there's just a paragraph break there and it cuts to later that night. What happened in between? That paragraph break contains multitudes. More evidence accumulates. First, Nancy finds a life-size picture of a $50 bill on Marco's computer. Then she learns the Swiss company who contacted Stewart manufacture ink, the type of ink that's used to print currency. And then Marco goes missing. Nancy glanced through the windshield and noticed a small, red, shimmery object dangling from a branch over the windshield. What in the world is that? George hopped out to retrieve the object. It was clearly a Christmas tree decoration, a styrofoam ball covered with red sequins. A ribbon encircled the little ball, and from it hung a folded piece of paper. How cute! So Nancy unfolds the little piece of paper. How strange, Nancy exclaimed, reading the words aloud. Wise up, girl detective. Nothing's perfect at perfect. What? Nothing's perfect at perfect? What's that supposed to mean? Is it supposed to be no one's perfect at perfect? We're supposed to believe the culprits counterfeit money when they can't even formulate a sentence? Nancy and George drive over to Stewart's printing plant again. I wonder how much money Nancy spent on gas during this case. Nancy asks Stewart what the deal is with his family's printing company and the Swiss ink manufacturer Buehler. Geisbühler's really complicated. Let me take you out for dinner tonight, and I'll describe the whole thing over a fabulous meal. This man is really diverting suspicion from himself by flirting, and I have to admire that. You might be wondering, the synopsis said that someone dies. We're 2/3 of the way through the book. Where's the corpse? And yeah, I'm wondering that too. Nancy felt a twinge as she thought of Ned, but reminded herself that her date with Stewart was simply part of her investigation. You keep telling yourself that, Nancy. Stewart takes Nancy to dinner at a novelty revolving restaurant. Nancy was drawn to Stewart, but felt guilty about Ned. What could she say, she wondered, to stop the relationship from going further? There's something I need to tell you, she began. Stewart leaned forward and took Nancy's hand, covering it with his own. Let me guess, Stewart said as he stroked her hand with his thumb. There's already a man in your life. But I'm not too worried about it. I want you, Nancy Drew, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to win you over. Stewart's going to kill Ned. Maybe Ned will be the dead person. The next day, George and Nancy search Marco's house and find a whole stack of $20 bills at the bottom of his trash can. In my imaginary game, Marco's disappearance would provide the perfect opportunity for Nancy to search his studio at the magazine offices. She would have to hunt for his password or play a maze game to unlock his computer and then find the money picture on his desktop. She would find the 20s in his studio trash can. In the book, Nancy knows that the 20s are fake because the treasury seal is blurry. But in the game, I imagine this would be a puzzle, possibly involving Nancy having to examine the bills under a microscope. Nancy figures out that Marco is staying at a holiday cottage nearby, so she drives up there. Nancy peeks in the window, and there, sprawled face down on the living room floor, was Marco Diani, her main suspect. He was lying in a pool of blood. In case you have any doubts, Nancy thinks he was obviously dead. Guess his life wasn't worth a plug nickel. I don't think Marco would die in the game version of Counterfeit Christmas. I think it's more likely he would be injured and taken to hospital like Henrik in Secret of the Scarlet Hand. Or that he'd just stay disappeared until the conclusion of the case. No one dies a brutal, bloody death in a Nancy Drew game. I don't think we've even seen any blood in the games. Back in River Heights, Nancy and George follow Stewart and Jason back to the printing plant and spy on them. The rattle of a printing press could be heard loudly and clearly. Nancy spotted the machine smack in the center of the printing room floor. Stewart stood at the front end, stacking the dollar-sized piles of paper into the feeder tray. We make plenty of money here, We do it the old-fashioned way, by earning it. I knew it! I knew Stewart was guilty. It's exactly the same plot as Secrets Can Kill. Nancy is mutually attracted to a cute guy, thinks about Ned and feels guilty, kisses the guy anyway, then finds out he's behind the mystery and has an easy excuse to extricate herself from the relationship and her feelings. Nancy craned her neck in order to see the back end of the press. There stood Jason. He stared, mesmerized, as fake money spewed from the printing press. This is another reason why Stewart and Jason could be combined. They're both the culprits. Anyway, Nancy accidentally knocks something over and reveals their presence, and she and George have to run away from Stewart and Jason. Nancy and George were within a few feet of the loading dock when they heard the sound of metal against concrete moving toward them. Nancy whipped around to see a large black industrial barrel on its side, rolling across the floor like an oversized bowling ball. The words "danger" and "flammable" flashed at her. Nancy tried to think how to dodge the deadly drum, but it was no use. The huge keg of chemicals kept coming straight at them. Nancy and George jump over the barrel like Mario and Donkey Kong. You know the principle of Chekhov's gun, where if a gun appears in a play or another piece of media, it should at some point be used? Yeah, of course you do. But do you know the principle of Keene's toxic waste barrel? Where if you introduce a moving barrel with the words "danger" and "flammable" on the side in all caps, it should never appear in the plot again and be completely forgotten. Speaking of Chekhov's gun, Jason pulls out a revolver. 3 guesses as to whether anyone fires the gun or not. Actually, you won't need that many. Villain monologue time! Jason and Stewart apparently first started forging money as a joke. We'll see how that stands up in court. What am I saying? They're 2 white dudes. They'll be fine. Jason and Stewart blackmailed Marco into helping them create the design for the money by saying that they'd tell everyone in town that he'd made counterfeit money in college if he didn't assist them. So Marco didn't want anyone to know about his past amateur attempt to counterfeit money, which, by the way, was only a $20 bill he made as a dare. So to prevent that, he starts to professionally counterfeit large amounts of money. Great idea. Stewart says, "Don't blame me, please, Nancy. I didn't even know Jason was going to kill Marco, and I really cared about you. I still do. I didn't even know Jason was going to brutally beat Marco to death with a fire poker. Anyway, I think you're really hot. Don't break up with me." I would have liked Stewart a lot more if he'd just been unabashedly evil like Jason, but instead he has to put on this wishy-washy display of remorse. Like, if he really felt that bad, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. Nancy and George managed to escape and gang up on Jason. Nancy flung herself at Jason, landing a karate chop on the back of his neck. In her left hand, she wielded a heavy metal printing roller like a baseball bat. She followed up the chop with a forceful wallop to his gut. "Urgh!" Jason grunted. Nancy yanked the gun from Jason's hand. She trained the gun on Jason. "Okay, just calm down," Jason spat out. "I am perfectly calm," Nancy told him without flinching. "Don't move an inch," she said, with steel in her voice. "Get real," Jason said. "You wouldn't shoot me." "Try me," Nancy said simply, and Jason stood stock still.
"I won't hesitate, bitch!"
In the game, there would be probably a lot less action. Nancy would either have to distract or trap Jason by doing a timed puzzle using the printing machines. "I hope that both of you are fond of enclosed spaces, and of each other," Nancy said, "because you're going to be spending a lot of Christmases together behind bars." Sounds pretty homoerotic to me. So Nancy solved the case, but she still hasn't bought a present for Ned. George says, "Just give Ned a beeper. That way the 2 of you will never be out of touch again, until beepers become obsolete in about 5 years. Dear Bess, looks like Jason and Stewart won't be having a very Merry Christmas. They'll be spending it in prison. I actually don't think this would be a very good Nancy Drew game. My enjoyment of Nancy Drew games is 83% based on vibes, and a magazine office is about as dry on vibes as Ned's wardrobe. And although, as always, I enjoy the wacky shenanigans of the Nancy Drew Files series, I don't think this was a very good book. So many interesting characters are introduced who just fade out after the beginning of the story. Pamela, Celeste, Chloe. Like I mentioned briefly before, Nancy spends so much time in this book driving to a location where one thing and one thing only happens before she leaves and drives to the next location. And it wasn't Christmassy enough. One of the only holiday-themed touches was the note tied to the Christmas ornament, which feels so deliberately manipulatively festive that I can't even appreciate it. We don't even get to see her exchanging gifts with Ned. This event was set up within the first 2 pages and we get no payoff for it. I think this whole book can be summed up by thinking of the principle of Chekhov's gun that I mentioned earlier. At every opportunity, this book does the opposite of what Chekhov's gun says you should do for good storytelling. They even introduce an actual gun into the story but never fire it. Even that silly vine I put in earlier follows the principle of Chekhov's gun, and it's only 6 seconds long. Anyway, I guess it wasn't all bad. I liked the hot women and the murder and that I was a character. I just want to thank you all for watching my videos and liking and subscribing and commenting. It means so much to me. There have been multiple times where I've been having a bad day and feeling blue, and then I get a notification from a nice comment from one of you, and it just really cheered me up. I am so glad that I started focusing on making Nancy Drew content, not only because it makes me happy, but also because I love being a part of this community and talking to you all about Nancy Drew. I don't think I can express in words how grateful I am, but just know that I appreciate you so, so much. Happy holidays! That's yellow. That's yellow green screen. That's not... That's yellow. That's not green. Never mind. Do you like my gun, by the way? I made it myself.